The night Madison cut the ribbon on her women's shelter, cameras flashed like fireworks. She stood in front of the polished steel doors, flanked by local council members and donors in tailored suits. Her smile was radiant, her voice crisp and practiced as she spoke about truth, trust, and helping women rebuild their lives. People clapped, some even wiped away tears. I stood toward the back, watching her bathe in admiration, one hand in my coat pocket, the other gripping a receipt for a motel she checked into the night before. Paid with her nonprofit's credit card. It was tucked in a manila folder with a dozen other items I hadn't quite figured out what to do with yet. I didn't feel rage. Not that night. Just an unsettling sense that the woman at the podium wasn't the one I married. Madison had always been magnetic, head of the debate team in college, queen of the "I'll take care of it" attitude, and the kind of woman who could convince a room full of strangers to open their wallets with nothing more than a tear and a well-placed pause. When she said she wanted to start a nonprofit for abused women, I didn't hesitate. We drained part of my 401k to help her get started. I built her website. I drafted the first donor letters. She told everyone she couldn't have done it without me, and for a while, I believed that wasn't just good PR. But somewhere along the line, that changed. At first, it was little things. Her stories about the women she was helping started sounding rehearsed, almost too perfect. Names changed. Details blurred. She'd recount a woman's escape from abuse in front of donors with such emotion, but later, couldn't remember the woman's last name. I chalked it up to stress. Then the financials started slipping. A few overdraft notices on her organization's account, she brushed them off as clerical mistakes. New furniture in the office that didn't match any purchase orders. A conference in Chicago that wasn't listed on any industry schedule. I told myself I was being paranoid. But the biggest change was in her. There was a time when we used to eat takeout Thai on the floor of her office, brainstorming donor campaigns and late-night social media posts. We'd talk about building something real together, something that helped people. But now, I'd get home to cold leftovers and vague texts saying she was at another emergency board meeting. She stopped sleeping next to me. She said she was tired, overworked. I believed her. For a while. What snapped me out of it was a moment I shouldn't have seen. I was dropping off dry cleaning, hers, mostly, and decided to swing by the office to leave it at her desk. It was Saturday morning, the parking lot empty except for her car. I had a key. I let myself in quietly. Then I saw him. He was leaning against her desk like he'd been there 1,000 times before. Relaxed. Confident. A leather jacket draped over the chair I bought her last Christmas. He reached for her waist with the kind of ease that only comes from repetition. She didn't flinch. In fact, she leaned in. I backed out before they saw me. Sat in my car for 10 full minutes trying to steady my breathing. That was the day I stopped guessing. I started tracking. I combed through statements, invoices, travel logs. I didn't even need a password, she'd never thought to lock me out. Her arrogance worked in my favor. The receipts piled up like bricks. Hotel stays that didn't match travel reports. Catering invoices from restaurants that didn't cater. Reimbursements to a consultant named Kyle Dawson. That was him. The guy from the office. Kyle's name appeared everywhere, in expenses, emails, even in some of the foundation's bylaws as a strategic financial advisor. I'd never heard of him before that day. Suddenly, he was everywhere. Madison, meanwhile, kept up the performance. Posting filtered photos from fake business trips, smiling beside women she barely knew, collecting donations from people who thought they were saving lives. I watched her laugh in interviews and flash that same practiced expression, the ribbon-cut smile. And every time I saw it, I felt the weight of another truth unraveling behind it. I wanted to believe there was a way to fix this. That maybe I'd caught it early. But the numbers didn't lie. And neither did the look on her face when she thought no one was watching. There's something about betrayal that changes you in stages. The disbelief fades first. Then the anger simmers. But for me, what lasted the longest was the shame. That I had believed her. That I had helped her. That everything I had sacrificed, time, money, trust, was just fuel for her performance. So I didn't scream. I didn't confront her. I became a ghost in my own marriage, walking through the days with a calm mask and quiet purpose. Behind the scenes, I kept building my case. I printed emails. Backed up files. Contacted a private forensic accountant under a friend's name. I even copied the hard drive from her laptop one afternoon when she left it open during a nap. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was preservation. She was preparing for something, I could feel it. The fake trips, the disappearing donations, the way she started locking drawers and guarding her phone like a secret agent. She thought she was playing chess. I was already halfway through the game. And the best part? She still had no idea I knew. There's something oddly therapeutic about background checks, especially when they confirm everything you wish wasn't true. Kyle Dawson's name didn't appear in any of Madison's public speeches, donor reports, or even on the nonprofit's website. But in the digital shadows, file footnotes, internal memos, QuickBooks entries, he was everywhere. I started pulling threads, and what unraveled was a man with a history so colorful it belonged on a true crime podcast. Kyle had served time in Florida for wire fraud, racketeering, and a real estate scam that left half a dozen retirees bankrupt and one judge visibly disgusted. His sentence had been shortened for good behavior, but I knew a predator in sheep's clothing when I saw one. He didn't reform. He rebranded. Now, here he was, listed as a consultant on Madison's books, taking in payments labeled as logistics and community outreach strategy. I looked up his so-called firm. No address. No employees. Just a mailbox rental and a generic landing page that hadn't been updated since 2021. Madison, meanwhile, had shifted into full absentee executive mode. More trips. More vague explanations. The intimacy, already in decline, completely vanished. She moved through the house like a guest, cordial, cold, and unreachable. She kept her phone upside down on the nightstand and started locking her home office, which until recently had been our shared workspace. The walls between us weren't just emotional anymore, they were physical. I said nothing. I was still building. It wasn't enough to know something was wrong. I needed to prove it, not just for my own sanity, but for the storm I felt on the horizon. She was planning something. That much I knew. So I reached out to a forensic accountant. Not through my name, of course, I wasn't that naive. A friend from college who owed me a favor made the introduction. The guy, mid-50s, government pedigree, clinical precision, wasn't cheap, but he didn't ask questions. I handed him a USB drive with weeks' worth of pulled records, payment histories, invoices, staff rosters, booking confirmations. I told him it was a theoretical case. He didn't buy it, but he didn't care either. 2 weeks later, he called me, audibly shaken. He'd never seen such blatant mixing of nonprofit and personal funds. He broke it down like a prosecutor prepping an opening argument: international wire transfers to Kyle's shell firm, reimbursements for personal expenses disguised as client retreats, and even a luxury watch purchased under the category wellness and recognition. The foundation, by the numbers, wasn't just bleeding, it was being drained dry. He asked me if I wanted to take it to the police. I didn't answer him. The truth was, I didn't trust the local authorities. Not with this. Madison's nonprofit had friends in high places, donors with badges, dinner photos with judges. If I walked in and said my wife was running a sham charity and sleeping with a felon, I'd be laughed out of the station, or worse, labeled a bitter husband looking for revenge. I needed someone untouchable. Someone who didn't care about social connections or public image. So I called the IRS. Well, not directly. I sent a formal whistleblower report, with every piece of documentation attached, filed anonymously, through a VPN, routed 3 times to avoid a trace. I wasn't paranoid. I was prepared. I requested contact only via email and gave them a burner address. It took 3 days before the first response came. Agent Angela Parks. No fluff, no small talk, just a request for more documentation and a short message that the matter had been flagged for internal investigation. That's when the waiting started. It's one thing to dig through someone's lies and watch them build a house of cards. It's another to sit across from them at dinner, listen to them talk about expanding the outreach program, and know that every word is a rehearsed fabrication. Madison had no idea the walls were closing in. That was the hardest part, pretending I didn't know. She kept moving through our life like an actress in her final performance. New donors, bigger galas, staged photo ops. Her phone buzzed constantly. I saw Kyle's name once, upside down on her screen, the notification half obscured. I didn't react. I just made a note of the time. There were moments, brief, jarring ones, where I caught her looking at me like a stranger. Not with hate. With caution. As if she was checking to see whether I'd caught on. I made sure she never got the confirmation she was looking for. Meanwhile, I tracked her every move. I even sat in on one of her public lectures at a local college. She wore a navy blue blazer and carried herself like a politician. The students clapped as she told them about lifting women from darkness into light. She called herself a vessel of purpose. I watched from the back row, wondering how she could be so flawless in her delivery, while a fraudulent wire transfer to Kyle's firm cleared at that exact moment. The image of her as a savior was so perfectly crafted, it made me sick. But I wasn't the one choking on it. Not yet. Angela checked in weekly. Nothing direct. Just cold, brief updates, files received, timeline adjusted, audit initiated. She couldn't tell me much, but I could read between the lines. The investigation was real. And it was escalating. I was sitting on a mountain of evidence, but I knew better than to blow the whistle publicly. The moment she sensed exposure, Madison would bury every trace of wrongdoing and turn the narrative into her own personal redemption story. I couldn't let that happen. Not until the hammer dropped. So I played the doting husband. Let her lie. Let her perform. But I knew the moment was coming. She wasn't just cheating on me. She was building a life on stolen money, and her partner in crime was a felon with a mailbox business. The facade couldn't last forever. And when it cracked, I'd make sure the truth didn't just leak. It would detonate. It was supposed to be over soon. That's what I told myself. The IRS was investigating. The documents were in their hands. Kyle's shady transactions had been flagged. I had a burner phone that vibrated only when Agent Parks checked in, and every time it lit up, I imagined it was the beginning of the end. But I forgot one thing. Madison wasn't the type to wait for a storm to hit. She was the storm. It started with an unexpected knock at the door. Not the IRS. Not some angry donor. A detective. Plain clothes. Soft voice. Badge flipped just long enough to prove he wasn't bluffing. His name was Marcus Bell, and he wasn't here for coffee. He was here with a warning. I wasn't being charged, yet. But I was being watched. According to a formal complaint, I had been siphoning money from Madison's nonprofit for over a year. The complaint claimed I'd gained unauthorized access to financial systems, altered donor logs, and even falsified travel reimbursements to make it look like Madison was misusing funds. I didn't say much. Just listened. My stomach turned to stone. She'd flipped the entire script. She saw it coming and got there first. I wasn't dealing with a careless liar anymore. I was dealing with someone who had studied how to burn a man from the inside out, and had the audience convinced he lit the match himself. Everything suddenly looked different. My careful evidence trail. It could be framed as sabotage. My digital footprint. It was already tangled in the very files I'd sent off. And now, with a detective breathing down my neck, I understood the real danger. This wasn't a betrayal. It was a setup. I spent the next few days trying to breathe through it, every moment clouded by the quiet paranoia that someone was watching. My name was on her nonprofit's launch papers. My signature was on the first donor accounts. If she doctored just a few things, or if Kyle rerouted enough payments to my name, I'd be buried under it. Not just in reputation, but legally. She was preparing to disappear with the story of a victimized wife betrayed by her greedy husband. And the worst part? People would believe it. In desperation, I went over my list. Everyone who knew Madison, who had supported the charity. Most were too far under her spell or too publicly invested to help me now. But one name stood out, someone who had been there since the early days, but always at the edge of the crowd. Camila. She was the kind of donor no one really noticed, quiet, always seated near the back at galas, never speaking unless spoken to. She rarely smiled, but she always watched. Madison called her the boring one with old money. But I remembered her eyes, sharp, focused. She saw things. I reached out. Carefully. Discreetly. She didn't hesitate. We met at a cafe off a back road just outside the city. She didn't ask why. She already knew. She slid a folder across the table like she'd been carrying it for years, just waiting for someone to earn it. Inside, photos, emails, wire transfers, property records. Kyle's name popped up in ways I hadn't even thought to look. Not just in Madison's accounts, but in 3 other nonprofits that had mysteriously gone under. One in Miami. One in Austin. One in Charlotte. Same pattern every time, romance, consulting title, shell firm. Disappear. Camila had dated him 10 years earlier. Fell for him hard. She was younger, and he was charming then, still dangerous, just better at hiding it. He cleaned out one of her investment accounts before skipping town, but she didn't come forward. She just started watching. She never lost track of him. When he showed up in Madison's world, Camila saw it all unfolding again, just with a new name and a bigger stage. She tried warning Madison once, early on. Sent her a letter. Madison had laughed it off in private and then publicly thanked Camila for her ongoing support. So Camila started documenting everything. Alone. Patient. Focused. Waiting for the moment someone else saw what she did. Now she had her moment. And I had my backup. Her file filled the gaps in mine. Emails Kyle had sent under an alias. Payments to the same untraceable crypto wallet. Even a blurry photo of Kyle at a private retreat with another executive director, 2 years prior, same story, different mark. I asked myself how deep this went. The fraud wasn't limited to Madison's nonprofit anymore. This was a network. A playbook. And I'd stumbled into the middle of it thinking I was just catching a cheater. No. This wasn't about cheating. This was about criminal enterprise built on guilt, grief, and public sympathy. And Madison? She wasn't just a pawn anymore. She was playing full-time on the other side of the board. I left the meeting with Camila feeling colder than I'd felt in weeks. The relief of validation didn't last long, because validation didn't stop subpoenas. Or reporters. Or whatever Kyle and Madison had planned next. She hadn't just tried to ruin me. She was about to erase me. The accusations were already circling. I'd been ghosted by a few mutual friends. One even hinted at a rumor that I'd taken Madison's trust and used it for my own business. That phrase felt like a poison slowly moving through the town. She was laying the groundwork to escape with the reputation of a woman scorned, and leave me holding the grenade. I stopped sleeping. Started looking over my shoulder. Kept the burner phone on me like it was the only real thing left in my life. But I still had one card to play. I didn't know what Kyle and Madison were planning next. But I knew who they were now. And if they thought I'd fold under the pressure, they still didn't understand the difference between betrayal and war. Because one is personal. And the other? The other doesn't end until someone is ruined. The venue shimmered with money. Crystal chandeliers reflected across champagne glasses, and every table bore the name of a corporate sponsor eager to be photographed beside Madison's empire. It was the largest event her nonprofit had ever hosted, black tie, valet, soft string quartet in the corner. Everything engineered to distract from the rot underneath. Sam moved through the lobby unnoticed. That's how it had been lately, people seeing him but not really seeing him. He was no longer the supportive husband. No longer the co-founder. He was just the man standing off to the side of every picture, blurred by proximity and time. He hadn't been invited, of course. But he knew the event better than anyone. He'd helped design this gala format 2 years earlier. Same hotel. Same flow. Same corner where Madison would deliver her carefully rehearsed speech with her perfect poise and fake humility. Only this time, the ending had been rewritten. Sam watched from the back, just far enough to see the stage clearly. Madison stood at the podium, draped in silver silk and confidence. Her voice carried like a hymn, gratitude, hope, resilience. She called herself a witness to healing, spoke about the lives changed, the donations that made it all possible. The crowd drank it in. But she had no idea who was in the room with her. The IRS had been working silently for weeks. Agent Parks had looped in the Financial Crimes Unit. Warrants had been issued under sealed orders. The timeline had shifted a dozen times, always moving, always adapting. But tonight, the case was airtight. Sam had insisted on this date. The gala was the final stage, the last chapter in Madison's story of deception. He didn't want her caught in some anonymous office. He wanted her seen, surrounded by the very people she lied to, the ones who would feel their own betrayal ripple through the marble walls when the truth hit. The moment came at the height of her speech. She paused, ready to introduce a new initiative. That was the cue. The ballroom doors opened sharply. For men in suits, 2 women with badges clipped to their belts. The music died in seconds. Conversation halted. The room fell into a vacuum of silence. Madison froze. Kyle, seated at a side table, turned to run, but never made it to the exit. One of the agents caught him by the collar, pushed him to the floor, zip ties cinching around his wrists as his shocked protest bled into the carpet. Phones came out. Flashes followed. Someone gasped audibly when they heard the word fraud spoken in a flat voice from one of the officers. Madison didn't move. For a moment, she looked like a wax figure, mouth slightly open, hands clenching the podium. Then she saw him. Sam stepped forward from the shadows, calm and steady. In his hand was a sealed envelope, aged at the edges, but clearly labeled. Exhibit C. He offered it to her without a word, and though she didn't take it, her eyes recognized it instantly. It was the letter she had once written to Kyle, describing how they would drain the bleeding heart donors and start fresh in Miami. Her signature at the bottom was the final nail. She broke. The scream was sudden and raw, a sound that snapped every head in the room back toward the stage. She thrashed as agents approached her, tried to resist, then collapsed inward, all posture and polish dissolving in seconds. She turned on Sam, venom in her voice, face contorted in disbelief and fury. But no one came to her defense. Not this time. Sam stood still. There was no satisfaction in his expression. No cruelty. Just a quiet conclusion written behind his eyes. He delivered the truth. Let the system do the rest. The agents placed cuffs on her wrists. Her dress caught the light like broken glass as she stumbled down the stage stairs. Cameras followed her. So did shame. Every step she took dragged her empire closer to collapse. Sam remained in place until she passed him. She looked at him once more, rage now replaced with something closer to panic. He said nothing. Just slipped the envelope into the hands of one of the agents as they moved by. That should have been the end. That moment should have closed the story, the traitor unmasked, the empire brought down, justice served. But it wasn't over. Not yet. As Madison was led toward the exit, she twisted her head one last time. Her voice was lower now, but the words sliced through the air with clarity and something more terrifying than hate, certainty. Sam didn't react. Just watched her disappear through the hotel doors, flanked by agents and whispers. The ballroom erupted in noise. The aftermath had begun, donors demanding explanations, organizers weeping into makeup, people scrambling to disassociate from the sinking ship. Someone knocked over a floral centerpiece. Glass shattered. The illusion of elegance fractured completely. Sam walked out the side entrance, calm amid chaos. His car sat in the lot just outside the lobby doors. Midnight blue. Clean. Unassuming. He barely took 3 steps toward it when the explosion ripped through the air. It wasn't fire so much as force, an eruption that swallowed the front half of the vehicle in flame and flung pieces of metal into the surrounding lot like shrapnel. The shockwave knocked Sam backward. Glass from nearby cars shattered. Sirens in the distance began to wail. People screamed again. But this time, it wasn't for justice. It was for survival. Smoke rose into the sky, thick and black, as security rushed toward the scene. The flames hissed as the sprinkler system tried to combat the inferno. Chaos unfolded around Sam as he lay flat on the concrete, ears ringing, adrenaline burning through his veins like acid. The car was gone. Vaporized. The message wasn't subtle. And somewhere in the haze, one fact crystallized in his mind like ice. This hadn't started with Madison. And it wasn't ending with her. The hospital lights were the kind that made everything look colder than it actually was. Sam blinked against the artificial glare as he lay in the sterile silence, half-conscious, surrounded by monitors that pulsed with a rhythm steadier than his thoughts. Burned, bruised, and stitched back together, he was lucky to be alive. That's what the nurse said, anyway. But Sam didn't feel lucky. The blast had done more than destroy his car. It had shattered any illusion that this was ever just about a cheating spouse and a stolen bank account. This wasn't personal anymore, not just. It was a system, and he had wandered into the engine room. Madison hadn't planted the bomb. She didn't need to. By the time the smoke cleared, she was already negotiating a plea deal. Fraud, misappropriation, conspiracy, wrapped up in a cushy agreement. No prison. Just restitution, community service, and a press release from her lawyer spinning her as the misguided founder of a failed nonprofit. Kyle never made it to trial. Somewhere between the booking and the first hearing, he vanished. Transferred, reassigned, reassessed, whatever word the feds were using now. Gone. No paper trail. No mugshot. No testimony. Sam asked questions. Too many. That's when the silence began. Phone calls went unanswered. Agent Parks stopped replying. Reporters turned cold. The message was clear, there were lines he wasn't meant to cross, and he had already stepped over more than one. Behind the scenes, the machine was closing ranks. The nonprofit was the tip of something deeper. Kyle hadn't just been running scams with Madison, he was laundering for people who didn't care about appearances. People who saw nonprofits as convenient washing machines for dirty money. Madison thought she was in control, but she'd only been propped up long enough to look legitimate. Once the cover burned, they cut her loose. Sam became the perfect scapegoat, adjacent enough to be suspicious, too clean to be credible. His name didn't make headlines, but it lived in the margins, whispers on social media, anonymous comments, late-night gossip among neighbors who used to smile at him on Sundays. No charges. Just doubt. His house was sold. The joint assets frozen. Madison moved into a condo funded by family support. Kyle. Rumor had him in Belize. Or dead. Or both. Sam drifted. Hotel to hotel. No real destination, just movement. He carried copies of every file. Everything he'd found, everything Camila had given him, everything that proved the fraud didn't end with Madison. He kept it all on a drive taped behind a motel mirror, backed up 6 times, stored in encrypted cloud servers with access protocols that took a week to build. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about leverage. The lie he had uncovered wasn't the last one. Camila found him again just after sunset in a motel outside Baltimore. He knew she would. She didn't knock. Just appeared like a shadow that had always been there. A gun rested in her hand, casual, familiar. She wasn't crying. Not this time. Her expression wasn't angry, it was tired. Calculated. Like someone cleaning up after a party she had no intention of hosting again. Sam didn't flinch. Didn't speak. Just looked at her and waited. She admitted everything without needing to say it. The surveillance. The bait. The evidence she'd handed over wasn't about justice, it was a weapon. Kyle was never her unfinished business. He was her rival. Madison was collateral. Sam had been the mule, carrying the load across the line. And now, with the fallout in motion, he was the last variable in an equation she wanted closed. He was supposed to be expendable. But what she hadn't accounted for was that Sam had already sent it all out. Every document. Every audio file. Every shadow trail. Sent to journalists, watchdog agencies, political opponents hungry for blood. The kind of people who couldn't be silenced. Some of them had already started digging. A few had published breadcrumbs, just enough to set the real fire. One of the packets even went to a senator's office. Another to a European news agency with no ties to anyone local. He hadn't waited. He'd made sure the moment the trigger was pulled, the bomb didn't stop with him, it spread. Camila hesitated. She didn't speak. Just stood there, gun in hand, staring down a man who had lost everything except the one thing she underestimated, the will to make the truth louder than her silence. Her hand dropped slowly. Not from pity. From calculation. A dead man with a digital deadman switch wasn't worth the risk. She left without a word. Sam sat in the dark for a long time afterward, the outline of her silhouette still etched in his mind. The danger hadn't passed. Not really. But he had done what he set out to do. He hadn't been the hero. He'd just survived long enough to blow the whole thing open. Later that week, he sat on the edge of a motel bed, watching a flickering television screen as a news anchor recited the story he had lived. A scandal. A federal cover-up. A pattern of nonprofit corruption spanning multiple states, implicating executives, donors, and even quiet politicians who had looked the other way. No names yet, but the hunt had begun. He didn't smile. Didn't cry. Just sat there, silent, alone, alive. And for the first time in months, not waiting. The screen cut to breaking news. A reporter stood in front of a courthouse, speaking quickly over the sounds of camera shutters and sirens. What began as a simple charity scandal has now unveiled one of the largest fraud rings in state history. The truth was out. And for once, everyone was watching.